But let's get our conversation started today with Gary Wilson joining me right now. He's a journalist with the Great Lakes Echo, has a passion for Great Lakes stories, and we're so glad that you're back with us on Great Lakes Week, Gary.
Oh, and I'm glad to be here. We were Detroit last year and now Cleveland, so we're making all the great stops.
We're making the great
and
stops
I have
along the
connections
basin.
to both cities too.
What's your connection to Cleveland?
Well, you lived here quite a few years ago, but came here not knowing what to expect and found it to be way better than I expected. So it's good to be back in Cleveland.
And you are based out of Chicago.
Yes, I am.
So we covered Great Lakes Week. Last year was in Detroit. This year is in Cleveland. Great backdrop for Great Lakes issues right here on Lake Erie.
Yeah, Lake Erie forever has been as you know, the poster child for almost all the problems of the sins of for the Great Lakes. And you know, there's been a great recovery with with Lake Erie over the years, but also recently there's been some backsliding. You know, most recently exhibited by the huge algae problems.
The algae blooms weren't as bad as they were last year around this time, but again, that doesn't mean we have to stop finding a way at halting the phosphorus runoff into the lakes.
No, that's always the risk. You catch a year like this year where there was a break in the weather, less rain, so there's a little bit of a tendency to become complacent, and we just can't do that. And I'm hoping the groups here realize that, and I think they do.
Okay, for people who are watching us at home, and this is the first time that they've ever seen Great Lakes Week, or that we're talking about all the Great Lakes causes, what can they expect to see this week from these meetings and conference sessions?
Well, this is the second annual Great Lakes Week where all the groups have gotten together. Previously, they had their own separate conferences, but they're trying to build off the success that they perceived that they had last year, and they did have some success. It was a very positive event, gets everybody together, you know, discussion, dialogue, agencies, government people, environmental groups. So I think they want to go to the next level this year, but you know, it's interesting. This is Ohio. It's an election year, so that's in play, and Lake Erie's problems. So I think they're really going to be trying to focus on you know, Lake Erie and a lot of the issues they're not just you know, just Lake Erie, but Lake Erie is definitely in the spotlight.
You know, talk about Great Lakes issues and the amazing fact that it affects 30 million people across the Great Lakes Basin. We're talking 8 states and also 2 provinces of Canada. So this is really an international issue when it comes to restoration projects that are going on in the lakes and taking care of some of the water quality issues that we have here. What are some of the top concerns on your mind that have cropped up in the last year or so that are really going to be pushing to the forefront of this conference that people are going to be talking about?
Well, I think this year you're going to see Canada in general with a larger presence. They passed legislation earlier this year that's similar to our Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. There's some funding behind it. There has been over the years a little bit of criticism of Canada for sort of not holding up their end of the bargain.
How so?
Well, you know, the Obama administration came into office, actually going back to 2005 when the Bush administration really started the ball rolling for the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, and then Obama administration started to fund it. Canada was kind of hanging back. They didn't really do a whole lot, and there was some polite criticism of the Canadians.
Polite criticism.
Yes, we like to be polite with our Canadian friends, and it's important to be polite, but it's also important to be direct. So this year there was legislation that was passed, and I just see more information coming out of Canada. Environmental groups in Canada are starting to be a little bit more optimistic, cautiously so, because they've got budget issues and all the constraints that we do on this side of the border. So Canada's going to have a bigger presence, and I think that'll be especially true related to the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, which was just announced between the 2 countries.
Also, Canada came out with a study this year that showed how the invasive species, Asian carp we're talking about, how they could actually exist in the Great Lakes and populate within about 20 years if they get through into Lake Michigan or one of the other lakes. And we're going to talk about that since environmental DNA was found of Asian carp in the Sandusky Bay in Lake Erie. But they did come out with a big study saying that we could perhaps see Asian carp, they could take a foothold within 20 years.
Well, I tell you, when that study was released, that really set off some alarm bells because the working theory was that it would be very hard to establish a breeding population in the Great Lakes in order for the Asian carp to gain a stronghold. That study revealed that it takes far fewer fish. I think maybe the number are 10 or 20.
It was 10, about 20, 10 of each.
And people were going, all of a sudden, geez, that's serious. We really have to start focusing on that. So good for Canada for helping us with that.
Talk to me about what you have been writing about over the last year or so with your commentary with the Great Lakes Echo and some of the issues that you've tackled that you're seeing is really kind of gaining traction.
Well, the big issue is the physical separation that's being studied between the Great Lakes, Lake Michigan, and the Mississippi River, that's playing out. That story continues to be in the news, and anytime I write about that, if I want to get comments and tweets on my work, I write something about Asian carp and physical separation because it's something that people can see and understand. It's a real hot button. The other thing, and I wrote something about this just a few weeks ago, the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative on this side of the border is really starting to be mature. And they've been focused on money, but they're coming to the point where I think they're going to have to look beyond the money a little bit. And I hope they take a look at that this week.
And when you say looking beyond the money, what do you mean by that? Obviously, the Obama administration has infused hundreds of millions of dollars into projects each year. But what do you mean when you say beyond the money?
Well, the original plan called for $20 billion for Great Lakes restoration. Now, about $13 billion of that was for sewers, which aren't a part of this. But still, they're only about 12% of what they stated the actual need was. We've seen the budget cut almost every year for Great Lakes restoration. Mm-hmm. It's almost at 50% if the additional cut takes place for next year. There's never going to be enough money, so there are other things that have to come into play. One of them that everybody is loath to talk about this year is regulation and enforcement, because those are two taboo words in the election year. But especially with the algae blooms, if the voluntary measures don't work, regulation and enforcement will have to come into play, and that's a tough pill.
And for people who are just starting to understand the algae bloom issue, people who are joining us from around the country on PBS stations, and maybe this is the first time that they've dove into the Great Lakes waters and the issues, not to use cheesy puns, but explain to them that would be going after farmers, that would be going after companies that may be the ones where the runoff is happening into the water? Primarily
farmers. Dr. Jeff Ruder from Ohio State, the Stone Lab here on Lake Erie, he's been studying algae for decades, and he is of the mind that it would take almost 100% compliance with best practices by all the farmers, and he doesn't see that happening. And he said if it doesn't happen soon, then we have to go to regulation and enforcement, which again, that's going to be a tough pill. Nobody likes to be regulated.
All right. Okay. Well, Gary Wilson, commentator with the Great Lakes Echo, is going to be with us all week long as we cover Great Lakes issues here on Great Lakes Week. So thanks very much. And we know that you'll be coming back to the big desk in just a short while from now.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks for joining.